Hello there. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Carlton Streetcar. It's another one of the mid-tier streetcars in the city, although it's certainly on the higher end of that mid-tier. Its history is also interesting in that it is more of an amalgam of other streetcar routes. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. The origins of the Carlton Streetcar dates back to the late 1800s. Prior to the creation of the Carlton Streetcar, service along Carlton and College Streets was provided by routes such as the Sherbourne and Winchester cars, which would link the University of Toronto and its surrounding suburbs to the city. In August of 1886, the Toronto Street Railway would begin service on the Carlton Streetcar. This route would use horse-drawn cars and operate from the intersection of College and Bathurst Street, east to Yonge Street, then south to Carlton Street. From there, the route would then run east to Parliament Street and then south to Gerrard Street. The route would then turn east and run to Shumack Street. In November of 1888, the Carlton Streetcar would be joined by the Dovercourt via McCall Streetcar, which would extend service on College Street beyond Bathurst Street to Dovercourt Road before turning north to Bloor Street. You can learn more about this in my video on the Dovercourt Streetcar. In 1889, a Dufferin Streetcar would be established, running the same route as the Dovercourt via McCall Streetcar, but continuing west beyond Dovercourt Road to Dufferin Street. This Dufferin route, however, should not be confused with the other and more well-known Dufferin Streetcar established by the Toronto Railway Company in 1914. They are completely separate routes. On September 30th, 1891, the Dufferin Streetcar would be abolished, and with it, service to Dufferin Street on College Street. In November of 1893, the College Streetcar would begin operations. This route would begin at the intersection of Church Street and Front Street. The route would then run north to King Street and west to Yonge Street. From there, the route would run north to College Street and then west to a Y at Bathurst Street with the Carlton Streetcar. 1893 would also be the year the Carlton Streetcar would be electrified. In 1894, the Dovercourt via McCall Streetcar would be abolished. The route would be resurrected soon after as the Dovercourt Streetcar, with the route having a brief jog along College Street from Dovercourt Road to Ossington Avenue. It would maintain this jog in the route until its abolition in 1947. From this point until at least 1910 at the latest, this would be the arrangement of streetcar service along College Street and Carlton Street. By August 28, 1910, the College Streetcar would be operating from High Park Loop, east along College Street to Yonge Street, then running south to a loop via Front Street, Scott Street, and Wellington Street. The Carlton Streetcar as well by this time had been rerouted, with its northern terminus now being a Y at Lansdowne Avenue and Royce Avenue, now called DuPont Street. The route would run south to College Street, then east to Yonge Street, south to Carlton Street and east to Parliament Street, then south to Gerrard Street and east to Broadview Avenue. In 1910, service along Gerrard Street would be mostly operated by the Parliament Streetcar though, which ran along Gerrard Street to Greenwood Avenue. At around this time, the City of Toronto had annexed land east of Greenwood Avenue, including the village of East Toronto, and wished for the Toronto Railway Company to extend its service along Gerrard Street into these newly annexed lands. The TRC, nearing the end of its operating charter, refused and was also well within their legal authority to do this, as these annexed lands were not part of the original charter, and thus the TRC had no obligation to serve them this late into the agreement. Facing this issue, the City of Toronto would decide to do it themselves, and would establish the municipally owned Toronto Civic Railway. In 1911, the TCR would begin laying down new tracks along Gerrard Street east of Greenwood Avenue to serve these newly annexed areas. On December 18, 1912, the Gerrard Streetcar would enter into service, running from Greenwood Avenue east along Gerrard Street to Coxwell Avenue. The route would then run north to Upper Gerrard Street before continuing east to a crossover at Gerrard and Main Streets. This route would run 24 hours a day until the TCR's Danforth Streetcar began operations a year later in 1913. When the Toronto Transportation Commission took over streetcar operations in September of 1921, they would set out to integrate the former TCR's Gerrard streetcar with the rest of the former TRC network. A month later, in October, the Gerrard streetcar would be renamed to the Gerrard Main streetcar and have its route changed. The route would now operate north from Queen Street along Coxwell Avenue to Gerrard Street. The route would then turn east and run to a crossover at Main Street. A year later, on October 19, 1922, the Gerrard Main streetcar would be extended north along Main Street to Danforth Avenue and then run east to Latrell Loop. Service along Gerrard between Coxwell Avenue and Parliament Street would be handled by a route confusingly called the Queen streetcar, which you shouldn't confuse with the actual Queen streetcar at the time, which itself isn't the Queen streetcar that exists today. You can watch my videos on the Queen, Kingston Road, and Parliament streetcars to find out what's going on here. Carlton streetcars would be unchanged at this time, while the College streetcar would see a slight change to its route, with it now operating along Bay Street instead of Yonge Street. On July 1st, 1923, things would change quite a bit for both the Carlton and College streetcars, as both routes would see substantial rerouting. Firstly, Carlton streetcars would begin terminating at High Park Loop and follow its old route for the most part. The route would run east along Howard Park Avenue to Dundas Street West before turning north along Lansdowne Avenue and then east along College Street. From here, the route would follow its normal routing along College, Carlton, and Gerrard Streets, terminating at Sword Street for a time due to construction work on the bridge crossing the Don River. The College streetcar would now terminate at Royce Loop. The route would run south on Lansdowne Avenue and east on College Street to Bay Street. The route would then run south on Bay Street and east on Dundas Street to Broadview Avenue. From there, it would head north to Gerrard Street and follow the old Gerrard streetcar route to a Y at Danforth Avenue and Main Street, absorbing that other Queen streetcar in the process. Due to the rerouting of the College streetcar to Danforth Avenue and Main Street, the Gerrard Main streetcar would be abolished on this day, ending 11 years of service for the Gerrard streetcar. This routing itself wouldn't last very long though, as on December 16th, the College streetcar would be again rerouted, this time to Lipton Loop via Carlaw Avenue, Riverdale Avenue, and Pape Avenue. The Pape streetcar would be absorbed into the College streetcar with this new routing. Lastly, the Harvard streetcar would also begin operating a Sunday service along Gerrard Street to Latrell Loop. The College streetcar would be joined by two tripper services, those being the College tripper, which followed the College streetcar from Royce Loop to McCall Street before breaking off and heading south to Queen Street and then looping via York and Adelaide Streets. There was also the College East tripper, which started at Latrell Loop and followed the College streetcar to a loop via Dundas and Victoria Streets. When the repair work on the bridge crossing the Don River was finished, the Carlton streetcar would be extended across and run to Latrell Loop via Gerrard Street, Main Street, and Danforth Avenue. The College streetcar's days were numbered, and on April 1st, 1933, the College streetcar would be abolished, ending 40 years of service. Its former route along Dundas Street to Lipton Loop would be taken over by the Harvard streetcar, which had been operating a Sunday service on this route since late 1923. With this, only the Carlton streetcar remained, with the route operating from High Park Loop to Latrell Loop. Few changes would come to the route after this, with some of the few being the extension of College Street to Dundas Street West, thus eliminating the short jog on the route down Lansdowne Avenue. Carlton Street and College Street would also be linked, thus eliminating the small jog in the route along Yonge Street. Tripper service along the route would remain into the 50s, with two services being offered. One of these trippers, which I will call the College tripper for the purposes of this video, followed the route from Latrell Loop to Lansdowne Avenue before heading north to Royce Loop. The other tripper, which I will call the Gerrard tripper, would follow the route from Latrell Loop to Parliament Street and then run south to Dundas Street, looping via Church Street, Adelaide Street, and Victoria Street. These tripper services would not survive long after the opening of the Yonge subway in 1954. In 1955, in order to relieve congestion at Latrell Loop, the Carlton streetcar would be rerouted to a newly built Main Street loop on Main Street just north of Danforth Avenue. The final major change to the route would come in 1966 when Main Street Loop was rebuilt into Main Street Station on the eastern extension of the Bloor Danforth subway. Carlton streetcars would utilize the loop before the subway began serving the station in 1968. With the introduction of the CLRV streetcars, the Carlton streetcar would be given the number 506. Since 1966, the Carlton streetcar has had a pretty uneventful life, bar the odd detour for track work, and this uneventful life doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon. That said, it might not have always been like this, as in 1997, the TTC examined splitting the Carlton streetcar in two like what was done to the King streetcar in 2018. While I can't find a map of this proposal, I can try to logic it out, and I'm doing this on the assumption that no new tracks or off-street loops would be built. The split service could have potentially looked as such. The 506A may have run its route from Main Street Station before breaking off at Bathurst Street and possibly running to Bathurst Station. An on-street looping scheme for the 506A could have only really been a loop via McCall Street, Queen Street, and Bathurst Street. The 506B could have potentially run from Hyde Park Loop along its route before breaking off at, say, Broadview Avenue and heading north to Broadview Station. It is also possible the 506B could have performed an on-street loop via Victoria, Dundas, and Parliament Streets. Either way, this discussion is academic, as the TTC would reject the idea of splitting the route. Another proposal the TTC had apparently looked at for the Carlton streetcar is routing every second car to Dundas West Station during rush hour. If this proposal is still on the table, it is currently on hold, as Dundas West Station doesn't have the capacity for a third streetcar route and likely won't for a long time. That said, while these proposals are either off the table or are on the shelf for now, there are really no other major plans to do anything with the 506 Carlton. The only thing right now in the route's future is a connection to the Ontario line at the planned Gerrard Station and the possibility of a turnback loop being built there. Right now though, if the loop is built, it will likely be for a rerouted 505 Dundas and short turn service. But maybe it may also reignite interest in the 1997 plan to split the route. But with that, I will end this video here. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it and want to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button because there are more videos like it on the channel and there are more videos like it on the way. If there's anything you want to say about the Carlton Streetcar, don't be afraid to do so in the comment section down below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.